My name is Susana Williams, and at 67 years old, I thought I knew what heartbreak felt like. I was wrong. That Sunday afternoon, I arrived at my son Michael's house, carrying a homemade apple pie, excited for our weekly family dinner. As I approached the backyard gate, I froze hearing my daughter-in-law Diane's cold voice. Why is she even still alive? She's always here interfering. The words pierced my heart like ice. But instead of running away, I made a decision that would change everything. Before I continue this story that transformed my life forever, let me know where you're watching from in the comments and hit that subscribe button. Frank and I were married for 38 years, before his heart attack took him 5 years ago. We had our struggles like any couple, but losing him left a hole in my life that seemed impossible to fill. Michael is our only child. I raised him mostly alone after his father, and I divorced when Michael was just 4 years old. It wasn't easy being a single mother in the 70s while working full-time as an elementary school teacher, but we built a special bond through those challenging years. When Michael brought Diane home 12 years ago, I was thrilled. She was smart, ambitious, and seemed to make my son happier than I had ever seen him. The wedding was beautiful, and for the first few years everything was wonderful. Diane would call me for recipes, ask for advice, and invite me over regularly. I felt blessed to have gained a daughter. Emma came along 11 years ago, followed by Thomas 2 years later. Being a grandmother filled my life with new purpose after retirement. I would babysit, while Michael and Diane worked teaching my grandchildren the same songs and games I once taught their father. Those early years with the grandchildren were some of the happiest of my life. The change was gradual. Looking back, I can see how things shifted after Diane got promoted at her marketing firm 3 years ago. The invitations became less frequent. When I would suggest coming over, there was always a slight hesitation before Diane would agree. Small comments about my parenting suggestions started to surface. "We don't really do timeouts anymore, Susana. The parenting books say it's not effective," she once told me after I had put Thomas in the corner for throwing food. "The children don't need sweaters. The house is perfectly warm," she would say, undoing my careful bundling of the kids. I tried to adapt to hold my tongue when I saw them giving the children soda or letting them stay up until 10 on school nights. After all, they were their children, not mine. But it hurt to see my input increasingly dismissed. Michael had always been my rock. I put him through college by working extra summer school sessions and picking up tutoring jobs. When he and Diane bought their first house, I contributed $20,000 toward the down payment. I never mentioned it again, never held it over their heads. It was what a mother does. But lately even Michael seemed distant. Our phone calls that once lasted an hour now wrapped up in 5 minutes. He rarely asked about my life anymore. When I mentioned feeling lonely, he would quickly change the subject or suddenly remember an appointment. "Mom, I've got to run. We'll catch up Sunday, okay?" became his standard line. I filled my days with activities to stave off the emptiness of my house. Book club on Tuesdays, volunteer work at the library on Wednesdays, and Thursdays church group on Saturdays. But evenings and Sundays not spent with Michael's family stretched endlessly before me. The silence in my house seemed to grow louder each year. I tried harder to be useful. I brought gifts for the children, offered to take them for weekends, suggested family trips. Most offers were politely declined. "The kids have activities," or "we're just so busy right now." I started to feel like an obligation rather than family. The worst part was questioning myself. Was I truly interfering? Was I failing to respect their boundaries? Or was I simply being discarded now that I was aging and less useful? These questions kept me awake at night, staring at the ceiling fan, wondering where I had gone wrong. Despite the growing tension, I clung to hope. Family was everything to me. Without Frank, without my teaching career, without close siblings of my own, Michael and his family were my world. I couldn't bear the thought of losing them too. So I kept showing up, kept baking their favorite desserts, kept asking about their lives and trying to be the perfect mother and grandmother. I thought if I just tried harder, things would return to how they once were. I was wrong in ways I couldn't yet imagine. That Sunday started like any other. I woke early, said good morning to Frank's photo on my nightstand, and headed to the kitchen to begin my apple pie. Michael had always loved my pies, ever since he was small enough to stand on a chair beside me stealing bits of dough when he thought I wasn't looking. I peeled the Granny Smith apples carefully, the way my mother had taught me, in one continuous spiral. The familiar motions were soothing, giving me time to plan my day. After the pie, I wrapped the small gifts I had picked up for the grandchildren. A set of watercolors for Emma, who had recently shown interest in painting. A dinosaur book for Thomas, who couldn't get enough of prehistoric creatures. The weather was perfect, that April day sunshine streaming through my kitchen window as cardinals visited the feeder I had hung last fall. I decided to wear the blue dress Frank had always loved, the one that brought out my eyes. A touch of lipstick, my simple pearl earrings, and I was ready. Looking in the mirror, I saw a woman trying her best to age gracefully, fighting the loneliness that threatened to consume her. I arrived at Michael and Diane's suburban home 30 minutes early, hoping to help with dinner preparations. Their modest 2-story house sat on a quarter-acre lot in a development of similar homes. I parked behind Diane's white SUV, noting that her sister, Amanda's red compact, was there as well. That was unusual for our Sunday dinners, but perhaps she had just stopped by. With the pie balanced carefully in one hand and the gift bag in the other, I approached the front door and rang the bell. No answer came, though I could hear faint voices from the backyard. After waiting and ringing once more, I decided to walk around back. The gate to their fenced yard had never been locked before. As I made my way along the side of the house, I passed the maple tree Michael and I had planted when they first moved in. It was thriving now, providing dappled shade over the pathway. I remembered how proud he had been to own his first home, how we had spent weekends gardening together while Diane was pregnant with Emma. The voices grew louder as I approached the gate. Through the wooden slats, I could see them all gathered on the patio. Michael at the grill flipping burgers. Emma and Thomas playing with their tablets at the table. Diane and her sister Amanda sitting in the lounge chairs, wine glasses in hand. They were laughing about something. I was about to call out when Diane's voice stopped me cold. Honestly, it's every single weekend now. She brings these gifts the kids don't need and hovers over them constantly, Diane said, taking a sip of her wine. Can't you just tell her you're busy? Amanda asked. We've tried. She gets this hurt look, and Michael caves immediately. Then I'm the bad guy again. My hand froze on the gate latch. They were talking about me. It's not just the visits, Diane continued, lowering her voice slightly. She questions everything we do with the kids. The food, the bedtimes, their activities. Like we're incompetent parents or something. Well, she was a teacher, Michael said, his back to me as he tended the grill. 20 years ago. Everything's different now, but she acts like she wrote the parenting manual. Diane's voice had an edge I'd never heard before, and the constant stories about when you were a kid. Michael did this. Michael loved that. It's like she's trying to take over as their mother. I felt my cheeks burning, my heart pounding painfully against my ribs. I should leave, I thought. Turn around now before they see you. But my feet seemed rooted to the ground. Why is she even still alive? Diane said suddenly, causing my breath to catch. She's always here interfering. My mother manages to give us space, but yours is constantly inserted into our lives." I gripped the pie plate so hard my knuckles turned white. The world seemed to tilt sideways for a moment. "Mom means well," Michael said weakly, "but she is over here a lot." His defense was so tepid, so insufficient, that tears sprang to my eyes immediately. This was my son, my little boy who I had nursed through chicken pox and driven to countless soccer practices. The child I had raised alone, sacrificing dating and social life to ensure he never felt abandoned after his father left. "You know," Amanda said thoughtfully, "my friend Jennifer moved her mother into Sunny Pines last year. It's one of those senior communities with different levels of care. Maybe that would give you all some breathing room." A nursing home. They were discussing putting me in a nursing home at 67, while I was still active, independent, and mentally sharp. Emma looked up from her tablet, a small frown on her face. Thomas continued playing his game, but his posture had stiffened. They could hear everything, but remained silent. I wondered what they were learning about family loyalty in this moment. My hands began to tremble. The pie felt too heavy suddenly. My purse strap dug into my shoulder. Nausea rolled through my stomach as their words replayed in my mind. Why is she even still alive? Memories flashed through my mind like a slideshow. Staying up all night with Michael when he had pneumonia at age 8, working through summers to afford his braces, cheering until I lost my voice at his college graduation. The pride on his face when he showed me the engagement ring he had chosen for Diane. My first instinct was to flee, to drive home and collapse into tears in the privacy of my empty house, to nurse my wounds alone as I had done so many times before. The pain of rejection was so acute I could barely breathe. But something shifted inside me in that moment. A lifetime of putting others first, of silencing my own needs, of making myself small to accommodate others, suddenly felt like too high a price. The disrespect being shown was not just to me, but to every sacrifice I had made, every act of love I had given. With a clarity that surprised even me, I knew I would not slink away in shame. I would not pretend I hadn't heard their cruel words. For perhaps the first time in my life, I would stand up for myself regardless of the consequences. I pushed open the gate. The hinges creaked as I swung the gate open, announcing my presence before I even stepped through. 4 heads snapped in my direction, expressions changing rapidly as they registered who stood before them. Susana Diane's voice was unnaturally high as she quickly set down her wineglass and stood. "We didn't hear you arrive." Michael had turned from the grill spatula, frozen in midair, his face draining of color. "Mom," he said weakly, "how long have you been there?" Emma and Thomas exchanged looks, their young faces reflecting a wisdom beyond their years. They knew exactly what had happened. I stepped onto the patio, still clutching my apple pie, forcing my legs to carry me forward despite their trembling. Long enough I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I brought dessert," I added, setting the pie on the table with hands that betrayed my age with their slight shake. "Apple. Your favorite, Michael." An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. Amanda suddenly became very interested in her phone. Diane plastered on a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You're early today," she said, as if that explained or excused everything I had heard. "We weren't expecting you until 4. "Clearly," I replied, looking directly at her. The facade of politeness felt suddenly unbearable. "I heard what you said about me." Diane's smile faltered. "I don't know what you mean." "You know exactly what I mean, Diane." I turned to include Michael in my gaze. "Both of you do." Michael set down the spatula and stepped away from the grill. Mom, whatever you heard was probably taken out of context. Is there a context where asking why I'm still alive would be acceptable? I asked, surprised by the steel in my voice. Emma gasped softly. Thomas looked down at his tablet, his small shoulders hunched. That's not what she meant, Michael began, but Diane interrupted him. Look, Susana, you're twisting my words. I was just expressing frustration about boundaries which you clearly don't respect if you're eavesdropping on private conversations. The audacity of her turning this back on me ignited something long dormant inside me. Boundaries. Is that what we're calling basic human decency? Now I came to bring my grandchildren gifts and share a meal with my family. I didn't realize that made me a burden worthy of being discussed, like an inconvenience. Michael stepped between us, ever the peacemaker. Let's all calm down. Mom Diane's been under a lot of pressure at work, and sometimes things come out wrong. Things come out wrong, I repeated, incredulous. Michael. She asked why I'm still alive and suggested putting me in a nursing home. Your response was that I come over a lot. Not that I'm your mother who loves you, not that I've supported you your entire life, but that I visit frequently, as if that's a crime. Diane's face flushed with anger. This is exactly the problem. You hold everything you've ever done for Michael over our heads, like we owe you unlimited access to our lives. Parents are supposed to support their children without keeping score. I have never kept score, I said, my voice rising, despite my efforts to remain calm. I have only asked for the respect and consideration I would show to any human being, let alone family. You interfere with how we raise our children, Diane continued, apparently deciding that offense was her best defense. You question our decisions. You act like you know better than we do about our own kids. I make suggestions based on my experience, I countered. I have never insisted you follow them. Mom Michael cut in his voice, taking on an edge I rarely heard. Maybe you should come around less often, just until things settle down. His words struck me like a physical blow, my own son choosing his wife's comfort over his mother's dignity. The grandchildren watched silently witnesses to this family fracture. Is that really what you want? I asked him, searching his face for the little boy who once couldn't bear to be separated from me. It might be for the best, he said, not meeting my eyes. Just for a while. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Thomas looked confused and frightened. Their innocence made the adult conflict all the more shameful. This is our family, Susana, Diane said, gesturing to Michael and the children. And you're just disrupting it with your constant presence. Our family, I repeated softly. I see. I turned to Michael, waiting for him to contradict her, to include me in that definition of family. He remained silent, looking at the ground. Mom, I think you should go, he finally said. The pain that ripped through my chest was unlike anything I had felt before, worse even than when Frank died. At least Frank hadn't chosen to leave me. I've been part of this family longer than you have, Diane, I said quietly, but I won't stay where I'm not wanted. I turned to leave my legs unsteady beneath me. The pie plate slipped from my grasp, shattering on the patio stones, the carefully crafted dessert ruined like my relationship with my son. I didn't look back as I walked through the gate. I half expected, half hoped that Michael would follow me, apologize, say they didn't mean it. The silence behind me was deafening. As I fumbled with my car keys, I caught a glimpse of Emma's face watching me from the living room window. She raised her small hand in a wave, her expression solemn beyond her years. I managed to wave back before sliding into my car. I made it 3 blocks before pulling over, unable to see the road through my tears. The house seemed emptier than usual when I finally returned home that evening. I moved through the familiar rooms like a ghost, not bothering to turn on lights as dusk settled. The answering machine's red light blinked steadily. 0 messages. I sat in Frank's old recliner, still maintaining the impression of his body after all these years. "You wouldn't believe what happened today," I whispered to the empty room, as if he might materialize to comfort me. Sleep evaded me that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Diane's voice. Why is she even still alive? I heard Michael's tepid defense, felt the sting of his dismissal. By morning, my eyes were swollen, my throat raw from crying. I expected a phone call, an apology, an explanation, something to indicate that our decades-long relationship meant more than an uncomfortable Sunday afternoon. The phone remained silent. The first day stretched into 3, then a week. I checked my cell phone constantly, making sure it was charged, that the ringer was on. I jumped at every sound, hoping it was Michael calling to make amends. On the 8th day, a text message finally appeared. "Hope you're okay." 4 words from my only child. Not an apology, not an invitation to talk. Just 4 words that somehow made the pain sharper rather than duller. I didn't respond. What could I say? I wasn't okay. I was shattered in ways I hadn't known were possible. My routines fell apart. I skipped book club calling with vague excuses about not feeling well. The library received a message that I wouldn't be volunteering for a while. My church group sent a casserole that sat untouched in the refrigerator until it spoiled. Food lost its appeal. The simple act of preparing a meal for one person seemed pointless. I existed on toast and tea, watching, as my clothes grew looser, my face more gaunt in the mirror. Sleep, when it came, was haunted by dreams, where I called out to Michael but he couldn't hear me. I would wake gasping, reaching for the phone to make sure I hadn't missed his call. There was never anything to miss. In the second week, I pulled out the photo albums stored in the hall closet. Images of Michael as a toddler, gap-toothed and grinning. Michael, on his first bicycle knees, bandaged from previous falls. Michael in his cap and gown, first for high school, then for college. His wedding day, where he had danced with me to "What a Wonderful World," whispering thanks for everything I had done to get him to that moment. Had I been a good mother? The question tormented me now. I had done my best raising him alone, working full-time, to provide a stable home. There had been moments of impatience, times when exhaustion made me shorter with him than I should have been. Had those moments outweighed the love, the sacrifice, the constant presence? Who was I if not Michael's mother-teacher? Was a role I had left behind years ago. Wife had ended with Frank's death. Friend seemed increasingly distant, as old connections weakened with age and my recent self-isolation. The emptiness of identity gaped before me like an abyss. 3 weeks after the incident, I summoned the courage to attend Emma's school spring concert. I slipped in the back, not wanting to create a scene, but unable to bear missing her solo. Diane spotted me as the families exited. Her expression hardened, and she steered the children in the opposite direction, ignoring my small wave. Emma glanced back, confusion evident on her face. Thomas didn't see me at all. That night I researched apartments in Florida. Perhaps a fresh start was needed somewhere warm, where the loneliness might be less oppressive. I could make new friends, join different groups, reinvent myself far from the ruins of my family life. The thought brought no comfort, only a deeper sense of defeat. My neighbor Grace began to notice the newspapers piling up on my porch. "Everything okay, Susana?" she asked one afternoon, concern etched on her kind face. I assured her I was fine, just fighting a stubborn cold. The lie tasted bitter on my tongue. The days blurred together. I stopped checking the calendar, stopped planning ahead. What was the point? The future stretched before me, empty of the family gatherings I had always assumed would fill my later years. No grandchildren's graduations to attend, no holiday meals to prepare, no one to remember my birthday or call just to check in. I canceled my annual physical. I let my hair go unwashed for days at a time. The simple acts of self-care that had once been automatic now required energy I couldn't summon. The mirror reflected a woman I barely recognized, hollowed out by grief and rejection. The darkness was so complete that I couldn't see a way forward. My world had contracted to the four walls of my house, and even those felt like they were closing in. The pain hadn't diminished with time as I had hoped. Instead, it had burrowed deeper, becoming part of my cellular structure, fundamental and inescapable. 1 month after that Sunday, I went to retrieve the mail, not expecting anything of importance. Bills, perhaps? Advertisements for services I didn't need. The walk to the mailbox at the end of the driveway seemed longer than usual, my legs unsteady beneath me. As I reached for the mailbox, the world tilted sideways. The ground rose up to meet me with alarming speed, then nothing but darkness. The steady beep of monitors pulled me back to consciousness. White ceiling, antiseptic smell, the unmistakable feel of hospital sheets. I tried to sit up, but found myself too weak to manage it. Easy, there came a gentle voice. A nurse with kind eyes adjusted my bed instead. You're at Memorial Hospital. Your neighbor found you collapsed by your mailbox. Memories filtered back slowly. The walk to get the mail. The sudden dizziness. The world going black. Grace, I asked, my voice raspy. Yes, that's her. She's been calling regularly to check on you. Said she noticed you hadn't been yourself lately. The doctor arrived soon after a woman about Michael's age, with a direct manner I appreciated. Mrs. Williams, you're severely dehydrated and malnourished. Your blood pressure was dangerously low when you were brought in. Can you tell me the last time you ate a proper meal? I couldn't remember. Days had blended together in my fog of depression. Has something happened recently? A loss or significant stress? She probed gently. The tears came before I could stop them. Through broken sentences, I explained about the incident at Michael's house, the subsequent silence, the growing isolation. The doctor listened without interruption, then said, I'm going to refer you to our hospital's social worker. What you're experiencing is a form of situational depression, and it's taking a physical toll. We need to address both aspects. 2 days of IV fluids and monitored meals brought my body back from the brink, but my spirit remained wounded. The social worker Barbara visited daily, helping me articulate the grief I felt over the fracture in my family. You've built your identity around being a mother and grandmother, she observed during one session. When that role was threatened, you lost your sense of self. It was a painful truth I had been avoiding. I had defined myself solely through my relationship with Michael and his family, leaving nothing to fall back on when that relationship crumbled. On the 3rd day, an unexpected visitor arrived. Emma stood in the doorway of my hospital room, looking smaller and more vulnerable than her 11 years. Grandma. Her voice was uncertain, her eyes wide as she took in the IV and monitors. Emma, sweetheart, what are you doing here? Are your parents outside? She shook her head, slipping into the room and approaching the bed cautiously. They think I'm at soccer practice. I took a taxi with my allowance money. The thought of her traveling alone sent a spike of fear through me, quickly followed by overwhelming gratitude that she had come at all. You shouldn't have done that, I said, even as I reached for her hand. Your parents will be worried. They're always fighting now, she blurted out, tears forming. ever since that day in the backyard. Daddy sleeps in the guest room sometimes. Thomas keeps asking when you're coming back. Nothing feels right anymore. My heart ached for her, for the disruption to her young life. I'm so sorry, Emma. Why did Mom say those things about you? Why did Dad let her, the directness of children, cutting straight to the core? Grown-ups make mistakes, I said carefully. We say hurtful things sometimes, especially when we're stressed or upset, but that doesn't make it okay. She climbed onto the edge of the bed, her small hand still in mine. Are you going to die? The question stunned me. No, sweetheart. I'm just a little sick because I haven't been taking good care of myself, but I'm getting better. Promise. Because Thomas said, if you died, it would be Mom's fault for saying that, and then Dad got really mad. The thought of my grandchildren carrying such a burden was unbearable. I promise. And it wouldn't be anyone's fault. Sometimes people just get sick. We talked until a nurse came in, eyebrows raised, at finding a child visitor. I explained she was my granddaughter, omitting the unsanctioned taxi journey. The nurse called Michael, who arrived 30 minutes later, panic and anger warring on his face. Emma Grace Patterson. Do you have any idea how worried we've been? Your coach called when you didn't show up for practice? His eyes met mine over our granddaughter's head, a flash of something unreadable passing between us. Mom, he acknowledged stiffly, I didn't know you were in the hospital. How would you? I replied, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. You haven't called in over a month. Emma looked between us, distress evident. Don't fight. Please don't fight anymore. Michael's expression softened as he looked at his daughter. We're not fighting, Em. But you can't just disappear like that. You could have been hurt. I had to see Grandma, she insisted. You and Mom wouldn't bring me. The raw truth of her statement hung in the air between us. Michael had the grace to look ashamed. I need to get Emma home, he said finally. Diane's beside herself. I nodded, accepting that this wasn't the time for the deeper conversation we needed to have. Thank you for coming, Emma. It meant the world to me. After they left, Barbara returned, having passed them in the hallway. Family, she asked. My granddaughter. And my son, briefly. That's a start, she said, sitting beside the bed. Susana, I'd like to talk to you about some resources that might help when you're discharged. There's a senior community center that offers excellent programs. Art classes, book discussions, travel groups, and a support group specifically for women navigating family conflicts. The old me would have declined immediately, too proud to admit I needed help, too focused on fixing things with Michael to invest in other relationships. But the woman lying in that hospital bed was beginning to understand that rebuilding her life would require more than just reconnecting with her son. I'd like that information, I said. That evening, Grace visited, bringing fresh flowers and genuine concern. You gave me quite a scare, Susana, she scolded gently, finding you sprawled by the mailbox like that. I'm sorry, I said, touched by her care. And thank you for calling the ambulance. The doctor says you might have saved my life. That's what neighbors do, she replied simply. Though I'd like to think we're friends, too. Friends. The word resonated unexpectedly. In my focus on family, I had undervalued these other connections that sustained life's fabric. Grace shared her own story as we talked about her estrangement from her daughter following a disagreement over her son-in-law's behavior. 10 years now, she said. I've made my peace with it, though the door's always open on my side. Her resilience, in the face of such long-term separation, both frightened and inspired me. Could I find such strength if reconciliation with Michael proved impossible? Later that night, my phone chimed with a text message from Thomas "Miss you, Grandma." Two children braver than the adults around them. A card arrived the next day, Michael's handwriting on the envelope. The message inside expressed concern about my health, but stopped short of addressing the deeper issues between us. Still, it was contact and acknowledgement of my existence after weeks of silence. The hospital social worker continued our daily conversations, helping me see how my self-worth had become completely wrapped up in my role as mother and grandmother. "Those relationships are important," Barbara emphasized, "but they can't be your only source of identity and fulfillment." On my 5th day in the hospital, I witnessed something that shifted my perspective profoundly. From my doorway, I watched an elderly volunteer reading to a child in the pediatric ward across the hall. The woman was perhaps 80, her face deeply lined but animated as she brought the story to life. The child, bald from chemotherapy, was transfixed, temporarily transported beyond the confines of illness. Neither was family to the other, yet the connection between them was palpable, meaningful healing for both. In that moment, I glimpsed a different kind of purpose, one not dependent on biological ties or obligation. That night I wrote in the journal Barbara had given me, filling pages with reflections on my life, my identity, my future. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a path forward that didn't center entirely around Michael's family. It felt both terrifying and liberating. The next morning, I asked for a piece of paper and made a list. Things I've always wanted to do. The art class I'd never taken. The Grand Canyon I'd never visited. The piano lessons I'd abandoned in my 20s. The novel I'd started but never finished. When Grace visited that afternoon, bringing my favorite mystery novel from my bedside table, I found myself smiling genuinely for the first time in weeks. "What?" she asked, noticing the change. "I think I'm ready to start living again," I said. "Differently than before, but living nonetheless." The day I was discharged from the hospital marked the beginning of a new chapter. Grace drove me home, having already stocked my refrigerator with simple, nutritious foods and put fresh sheets on my bed. "You don't have to do all this," I protested weakly as she settled me into my living room with tea and toast. "Of course I do," she replied, matter-of-factly. "That's what friends are for. Besides, you'd do the same for me." She was right, I realized. I would have done the same for her or for any friend in need. Yet I had somehow believed I should face my own struggles alone, as if asking for help diminished me. Following Barbara's advice, I contacted the senior center the following week. The building was bright and welcoming, nothing like the dreary institution I had imagined. People my age and older moved with purpose through the space, engaged in conversations, activities, planning committees. "I'd like to try the beginner's art class," I told the receptionist tentatively. It was the first item on my list of things I'd always wanted to do. The class met on Thursday mornings. I arrived early, nervous, as a schoolgirl on the first day, clutching the supply list the center had provided. The instructor, Louisa, had a calming presence and genuine enthusiasm for teaching novices. "Everyone has creativity within them," she assured us. "Our job is simply to give it permission to emerge." My first attempts at painting were awkward, childlike, but there was something profoundly satisfying about applying color to canvas, about creating something that hadn't existed before. I found myself looking forward to Thursday mornings, to the peaceful concentration, to the camaraderie of fellow beginners. With Barbara's encouragement, I reached out to former teaching colleagues I'd lost touch with. Janet and Phil invited me to dinner, expressing shock at my weight loss and concern about my withdrawn state these past weeks. "We called several times," Janet said. "Left messages. We were worried." I hadn't even checked my messages during the dark period after the backyard incident. The thought that people had been trying to reach me, caring about my welfare, touched me deeply. Over lasagna in their cozy dining room, I shared the painful rift with Michael and his family. Speaking it aloud to sympathetic ears was cathartic in ways my solitary suffering had not been. "Family can hurt us like no one else," Phil said, his hand covering his wife's, in a gesture of long-established intimacy. "But shutting down isn't the answer." What is, I asked, genuinely wanting to know? Building a life rich enough that one relationship doesn't have the power to devastate you, Janet replied, even one as important as your child. The wisdom, in her words, resonated. I had placed all my emotional eggs in Michael's basket, leaving myself vulnerable to complete collapse when that relationship faltered. Inspired by our conversation, I signed up for the community garden plot I had walked past for years, but never considered joining. The physical work of preparing soil, planting seeds, tending young plants, connected me to the cycles of growth and renewal in ways I desperately needed. My garden neighbor was a quiet man named James, a widower who grew the most magnificent tomatoes I had ever seen. Our conversations began with gardening tips and gradually expanded to books, travel, and eventually the shared experience of loss, his through death, and mine through estrangement. The hardest part, he confided one morning, as we weeded our respective plots, was learning to set the table for one. I nodded, understanding completely. And cooking meals that won't leave days of leftovers. And having thoughts you want to share with no one there to listen. Such simple acknowledgments of grief, yet they created a bridge between us, an unspoken recognition that we comprehended each other's pain. 6 weeks after my hospitalization, I volunteered at the library's literacy program working with adults learning English as a second language. The familiar role of teacher, but with adult students who brought life experiences and perspectives that enriched our interactions. Maria, a grandmother from El Salvador, showed me photos of grandchildren she hadn't seen in 3 years. Her courage in building a new life in a strange country humbled me. My own challenges seemed smaller in comparison. "You miss them every day," she said, in carefully practiced English, pointing to the photos. "But you live. You must live. You must live." The simple directive became my mantra on difficult days, when the silence from Michael stretched unbroken, when I saw children Emma's age at the grocery store, when Father's Day advertisements reminded me that the family barbecue would not include me this year. The spare bedroom that had been maintained as a children's space for Emma and Thomas's occasional overnight visits became my art studio. I painted the walls a serene blue, set up the easel Louisa had helped me select, arranged my growing collection of supplies on shelves where once toys had been stored. The transformation of the physical space paralleled my internal journey. I was reclaiming rooms in my home and in my heart, repurposing them for a life I was building day by day. Barbara's counseling sessions continued on an outpatient basis, helping me navigate the complex emotions of family estrangement. "You're mourning," she explained. "Not a death, but the loss of a relationship as you knew it, the loss of a future you had imagined." She encouraged me to write letters to Michael that I didn't send, expressing both my hurt and my love without the pressure of his response. The exercise released emotions that had been festering inside me. In July, 3 months after the backyard incident, I took my first solo trip to the beach, a small bed and breakfast on the coast, 3 hours from home. I had always traveled with Frank then, with Michael's family, after Frank's death, never alone. The freedom was both exhilarating and intimidating. I could eat when and where I wanted, sleep late or rise early, spend the entire day reading on the sand if I chose. No one's preferences to consider but my own. On my second evening there, watching the sunset paint the water, gold and crimson, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for months. Not happiness exactly, but a quiet contentment with my own company, a recognition that solitude need not equal loneliness. My phone chimed with a text message from Emma, "Miss you. Can I call sometime?" It was the first direct contact since her hospital visit. With trembling fingers, I replied, "I would love that. My heart is always open to you." We spoke the next day, a somewhat stilted conversation with Diane clearly hovering in the background. Still hearing Emma's voice, her enthusiastic description of a science project, her questions about my beach trip was balm to my wounded spirit. "Mom said I could ask if you want to meet us at the park sometime," she said toward the end of the call, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "just for a little while." "I would like that very much," I replied, careful to keep my tone measured, despite the hope surging through me. The call ended with her quiet, "Love you, Grandma," 4 words that sustained me through the remainder of my trip and the drive home. The park meeting was set for the following Saturday. I arrived early, my stomach fluttering with nervous anticipation. Would Michael be there? Had they told Thomas? Would Diane be civil? Emma spotted me, first breaking away from her parents to run across the playground. "Grandma, you got so tan." Her hug was fierce, her thin arms clinging as if afraid I might disappear. Thomas followed more cautiously, eyeing me with uncertainty until I opened my arms to him as well. Diane and Michael approached slowly. The tension was palpable, but civility prevailed as we exchanged awkward greetings. "You look well," Michael said, studying my face. "Healthier than at the hospital." "I am," I confirmed. "I've been taking better care of myself." The conversation remained surface level, focused on the children, the weather-neutral, topics that wouldn't disturb the fragile peace. But it was contact, a tiny bridge spanning the chasm between us. As the children played, Diane surprised me by sitting on the bench beside me. "This isn't easy for any of us," she said without preamble. "But the kids miss you. And Michael does too, though he's too stubborn to say it." "I miss all of you," I admitted. "But things can't go back to how they were." She nodded, understanding what I meant. The old dynamic of her resentment and my obliviousness of Michael's conflict avoidance and my excessive dependence couldn't be resurrected. If we were to have any relationship moving forward, it would need to be built on new foundations. Barbara at the hospital suggested family counseling, I ventured. "If you and Michael would consider it." Diane was quiet for a long moment. "I might be open to that," she said finally, "for the kids' sake." It wasn't enthusiastic agreement, but it was more than I had dared hope for. A beginning. As summer turned to fall, my life developed a rhythm independent of Michael's family. Art class on Thursdays, literacy tutoring on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, community garden on weekends. Coffee with Grace each Monday morning. Dinner with Janet and Phil monthly. Phone calls with Emma, weekly supervised but gradually growing more natural. In September, my Thursday art class held a small exhibition of student work. To my astonishment, Louisa selected one of my paintings for display, a watercolor of the beach sunset from my solo trip. "There's real feeling in this piece," she told me. "A sense of solitude that isn't tragic. It's peaceful, contemplative." I sent an invitation to Michael and his family without expectation. To my surprise, Michael came alone, arriving just as the exhibition opened. "Dad's here to see Grandma's painting," I overheard Emma telling her friend on the phone that evening. He said he wouldn't miss it. His praise was genuine, his interest in this new facet of my life sincere. We had coffee afterward, our first one-on-one conversation since the incident. "You seem different," he observed, studying me across the table. "I am different," I acknowledged. "What happened changed me, forced me to change." He had the grace to look ashamed. "Mom, about what happened." I held up a hand to stop him. "Not here, not now. When we're both ready with someone like Barbara to help us through it. Today I just want to enjoy having my son see my painting." He nodded, accepting the boundary I had set. Another first. As we parted, he hugged me briefly. "I'm glad you're doing well, Mom. Really glad." The embrace was quick, somewhat awkward, but it was physical contact after months of separation. I held the memory close, a small light in the continuing darkness of our estrangement. October brought my first invitation back to Michael's house, a carefully negotiated dinner with clear start and end times, with Diane's sister pointedly not in attendance. The evening was strained, but civil the children's excitement at having their grandmother visit, providing a buffer against adult tension. I brought a painting for each child, but nothing for Michael and Diane. No baked goods, no household items that could be interpreted as commentary on their home. My presence was the gift, nothing more, nothing less. As I prepared to leave at the agreed-upon time, Emma asked, "Will you come back next week?" Before I could respond, uncertain of the protocol in this fragile new arrangement, Michael answered, "Not next week, Em. But we'll see Grandma at the park on Saturday, remember?" It was the first acknowledgement of ongoing contact of a tentative future that included me in their lives. A small victory, but significant. Driving home, I reflected on how different this visit had felt from the many that had preceded the backyard incident. I had entered their home not as a supplicant, grateful for inclusion, but as an individual with her own full life, choosing to share time with them. The balance had shifted subtly, but unmistakably, and with it, the foundation for something healthier had been laid. 6 months after that devastating Sunday, I barely recognized the woman I had been. My hair, once shaped in the same style I had worn for decades now, fell in a more flattering bob that Grace's hairdresser had convinced me to try. The clothes that had hung on my frame during my hospitalization now fit properly again, joined by new pieces in colors I had previously considered too bold. My calendar, once organized entirely around Michael's family's schedule, now filled with my own activities and friendships. The community center held an exhibition featuring my newest painting, an abstract exploration of grief and resilience that had poured out of me during a particularly cathartic session. James from the community garden had become a regular companion for weekend nature walks and occasional dinners. Not romance, as we were both still carrying our respective losses, but a comfortable friendship that enriched both our lives. Most significantly, the panic that had once gripped me when days passed without contact from Michael had subsided. I lived fully in the present, appreciating the relationships and activities that filled my days, while holding space for continued healing with my son and his family. In early November, Michael suggested meeting for coffee, just the two of us. We chose a neutral location, a small cafe halfway between our homes. I arrived first, selecting a quiet corner table, my heart beating faster despite my outward calm. He looked tired when he arrived, the demands of work and family evident in the new lines around his eyes. Yet he also seemed more settled than during our recent brief encounters, more present. "Thank you for meeting me," he began after ordering. "I've been wanting to have a real conversation for a while now." "I'm listening," I said, giving him space to lead. First, I want to apologize. What happened that day? Hearing those things from Diane, and then my reaction when you confronted us. It was wrong. You deserved better from both of us, but especially from me. The apology so long awaited washed over me like a cleansing rain, not erasing the hurt but beginning the process of healing. I appreciate that I said simply, "I've been thinking a lot about our relationship," he continued, "about how you raised me alone after Dad left, how much you sacrificed. I took that for granted. You were a child," I reminded him. Children are supposed to take their parents' love for granted. It's only when we're adults that we can look back and understand. Well, I understand now. And I'm sorry it took this rupture for me to see it clearly. We talked for nearly 2 hours, delving into memories and misunderstandings, acknowledging hurts on both sides. He spoke of feeling torn between his wife and mother, of the pressure to be peacekeeper of his own fears about failing as a husband and father. I shared how my identity had become so wrapped up in motherhood that I had lost sight of my own personhood, how my fear of irrelevance had led to overstepping boundaries I hadn't even recognized. When Frank died, I admitted I transferred all my emotional needs to you and your family. That wasn't fair or healthy. And we weren't honest about how it affected us, he acknowledged. Diane let resentment build instead of communicating directly. I avoided conflict instead of facilitating understanding. It wasn't a perfect conversation. There were moments of defensiveness on both sides, old patterns threatening to reassert themselves. But there was also genuine listening, true attempts to understand each other's perspective. "I've missed you, Mom," he said as we prepared to leave. "The kids have too. Even Diane admits it's not the same without you." "I've missed all of you," I replied. "But I needed this time to find myself again to build a life that doesn't revolve solely around being your mother." He nodded, understanding. "I can see the difference. You seem stronger, more yourself." I agreed. And that makes me a better mother and grandmother even if I'm present less often. The following weekend, I met the grandchildren at the park, our new regular meeting place. Emma showed me her science project ribbons, and Thomas demonstrated his improved soccer skills. Their easy affection unchanged, despite the adults' complications, was a gift I no longer took for granted. Dad said, "Maybe you could come for Thanksgiving," Emma mentioned casually as we shared ice cream. "Would you please?" Thanksgiving had always been at my house in previous years, with me doing all the cooking, accommodating everyone's preferences, exhausting myself in the process. "That would be nice," I said. "What can I bring?" "Just you," Thomas said, chocolate ice cream rimming his mouth. "And maybe pie. Nobody makes pie like you, Grandma." The following week, Barbara facilitated a session with Diane and me without Michael present. It was perhaps the most difficult meeting yet. Two women with a fundamental connection through the man they both loved, but little natural affinity for one another. "I want to understand why my presence felt so threatening to you," I said, when Barbara asked what I hoped to gain from our conversation. Diane was quiet for a long moment. "It wasn't just your presence," she finally said. "It was feeling constantly judged, like nothing I did as a mother or wife was quite right in your eyes." I never meant to convey that, I said, surprised. "I think you're a wonderful mother." "You never said that," she pointed out. "You offered corrections, suggestions, alternative ways to do everything from folding laundry to disciplining the kids." Her perspective was revelatory. What I had seen as helpful guidance she had experienced as criticism and undermining. The realization was painful but necessary. "I'm sorry," I said sincerely. "I was trying to be useful to share what I'd learned, but I can see now how it came across." And I'm sorry for what I said that day, she replied, meeting my eyes directly for perhaps the first time. It was cruel and untrue. I was frustrated and venting, but that's no excuse. It wasn't instant friendship, but it was honest communication, the foundation for a different kind of relationship moving forward. Thanksgiving arrived with a mix of anxiety and anticipation. I had accepted the invitation to Michael and Diane's home, bringing only the requested pie and a centerpiece created in my art class. A simple arrangement that acknowledged the holiday without imposing on Diane's hosting. The house had been rearranged since my last visit months ago, the formal dining room converted to a music room with Emma's piano taking center stage. We ate in the more casual kitchen space, at a table extended with leaves to accommodate everyone. "Mom, would you like to say grace?" Michael asked, as we gathered around the table. The invitation to lead this family moment was symbolic, an acknowledgement of my place in their lives. I kept the blessing simple and inclusive, focusing on gratitude for health, for reconciliation, for second chances. The meal wasn't perfect. There were moments of tension, old patterns threatening to resurface. Thomas spilled his milk. Emma complained about the Brussels sprouts. Diane seemed stressed about the turkey's doneness. But there were new patterns, too. I complimented Diane sincerely on the stuffing, a recipe I had never tried. Michael shared stories from his own childhood that I had forgotten seeing them through adult eyes now. The children asked about my painting class, genuinely interested in this grandmother they were getting to know in a new way. "You've redone your guest room," Diane asked, as we cleared dishes together, a task she would have handled alone in the past. "It's my art studio now," I explained. "I can convert it back when the children visit, but for now it's my creative space." She nodded, understanding the significance of the change. "They'd probably love to see where you paint. Maybe next time they could visit your house." The olive branch was offered casually, but its importance wasn't lost on me. "I'd like that," I said simply. As the evening drew to a close, I gathered my things, mindful not to overstay. The goodbye hugs were warmer than the greeting ones had been, the invitation to return more genuine. "This was nice," Mom Michael said as he walked me to my car. "Different but nice." "Change isn't always bad," I replied, embracing him. "Sometimes it's exactly what we need." Driving home to my peaceful house, no longer an empty house, but a space filled with my own presence, I reflected on the journey of the past 6 months, the devastating words that had begun it, all the pain that had nearly destroyed me, the rock bottom that had ultimately become the foundation for rebuilding. I had lost the illusion of family as I had imagined it, but gained something more authentic in its place. I had discovered strengths I never knew I possessed, interests I had never explored, friendships I had undervalued. Most importantly, I had learned that standing up for myself, far from destroying my relationship with Michael, had ultimately been the only way to save it. Our new connection, still tender but growing stronger, was built on mutual respect rather than dependency and obligation. The woman who had driven away from Michael's backyard in tears 6 months ago would never have believed this outcome possible. She had seen only the ending, not the potential beginning contained within that painful moment. As I settled into my favorite chair, surrounded by books, I was reading paintings. I had created photos of friends, old and new. I felt a sense of peace that transcended simple happiness. This was contentment, hard-won and precious. The journey wasn't over. There would be setbacks, moments when old hurts resurfaced, times when boundaries needed reinforcement. Family healing, like all significant change, wasn't a destination, but an ongoing process. But I faced that future with hope rather than fear, with strength rather than desperation. Whatever came next, I would meet it as a whole person, not defined solely by my role as mother and grandmother, but by the full measure of who I had become. Have you ever experienced a painful wake-up call that forced you to rebuild your life? Or found yourself defined by just one role when you were capable of so much more? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Your support means the world to me, and I'm grateful for this community where we can share our journeys of growth and healing together. Thank you for listening, and remember, it's never too late to rediscover yourself.